Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. In this episode, we discuss a bit about developing black and white film, along with Ben's continued interest in the medium. Further, we talk about how we learn and how mistakes help us to improve, both in life and in our photography. Let's dive right into it, shall we?
What is going on, Cody? What have you been up to lately?
Slowly starting to prepare for my trip down to the Smokies.
Nice.
Yeah, between that and schoolwork, it's been an interesting week, for sure.
Now, is it the sort of thing where your mind is more so on the trip and a little less on the schoolwork?
Looking forward to the trip immensely. So in that regard, yeah, but at the same time, I also know that okay, I really got to focus on this other work that I got to get done, because I'm pretty much all ready for the trip. Just a matter of packing my clothing and packing some food, getting all of that together. But I have a couple of days yet, so that'll be easy enough to do in one day.
Now, on the backpacking trip that you went on, a few weeks back, did you bring your camera on that one at all?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Did you shoot any photos, or was it more so just kind of getting a feel for packing things and everything along those lines?
I made one photo. Yeah, just one. And it was actually a group shot, which was interesting to do. I don't remember if I talked about this before, but so I had everyone set up by this first vista that we got to, and they were all stood by a fence, and it was my girlfriend, my buddy, and his girlfriend that were there. And obviously with large format, it's really difficult to do a 4-person exposure when you're in the shot. So I thought, I'm going to try something different here. So I had the three of them stand how I wanted them to, look at the camera, and I took a single photograph. Then I had my buddy come over. Everyone else, the two girls stayed there. I had my buddy come over, and I explained to him how to expose the sheet of film a second time. Same exposure settings and everything.
Uh-huh.
And then I went and I stood aside of my girlfriend and had everyone else leave then. So it was just me standing there, and then he took a photo of essentially just me on that second sheet.
Huh.
So a double exposure to get all four of us into one photo.
That'll be interesting. Have you developed that one yet?
No, because I have when I first got back into film this year, after that little break that I had with digital, I decided I'm going to wait until July or August to develop. And I made that decision back in March. So now I'm just sitting on this backlog of, it's only 20 sheets of film, but still I'm waiting. That's testing my patience there.
Yeah, I'm really curious how that one's going to turn out.
I've done double exposures before, but
so you'll be kind of ghosted
intentional
in there, right? Because I guess everyone will be kind of ghosted in to some degree.
I mean, I honestly don't think you'll even be able to tell.
I guess it depends on the light and all that too, and the background and everything else.
I mean, I've done double exposures before, and I think it was only an eighth of a second anyway.
Okay.
So it's not like it's really, there's going to be much blurring or weird ghosting, I guess you could call it, over the leaves and stuff. But yeah, I was actually going to develop that one earlier, shortly after the trip, but I made the mistake of, I had other film holders in that same bag, and I couldn't remember which one was which that had it in, and I think I had 3 film holders that I had exposed from being up in the mountains in general then. So I was like, yeah, I'll just wait. That's okay.
Yeah.
And right now I just got in. I'm going to be doing an article for Photography Life that's about testing film developers. And I have PyroCat HD. I have Ilford DDX, Cinestill's Monobath, and then I'm also trying Caffeinol, which should be interesting. So I already took exposed 4 sheets of film just at the shed in my backyard here, all one after another, same settings, pretty much the same lighting, and I'm going to develop each one of those in a different developer and then compare them and see how the differences are and everything. But the Caffeinol especially is going to be interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. That's not something I've really seen a comparison of. I mean, I'm sure there might be stuff out there, but it's never been anything that I've searched for. So that definitely will be quite interesting to see, so people can kind of see the exact results and how it all works out.
Yeah, I mean, I've been using Ilford DDX for essentially since I started doing film developing at home. But I know a lot of people start off with Caffeinol because it's cheap, and it's all stuff pretty much around the house that you can make it with. I mean, for those who aren't familiar, Caffeinol is instant coffee with vitamin C, washing soda, and water, all mixed together. And sometimes people put in like iodized salt, I think. It depends on what formula exactly you're following, but for the most part, that's all that it is. And it's so weird that develops film. Yeah. But then again, you can, like, I'm going off of the directions on caffeinol.org, I think it is. And they also have other alternative processes where you can develop film with beer or with soda and just all this different. I'm like, what?
That is fascinating stuff. I actually on the topic of shooting film and developing all that stuff, I actually bought a Stearman Press 8x10 developing tray.
Nice.
And then also I bought some of the Delta 100 because I do want to get back into that again, and it's certainly something that I'm looking forward to doing, especially now with gas prices where they are, and rather than having the urge to travel somewhere far away and consume many tanks of gas, maybe find some local stuff to shoot some oak trees or some stuff like that. So
even
I'm really looking forward to doing that. Yeah. I mean, there's
especially
stuff that's
when you're just starting
close.
out.
Yeah, and seeing as how I have an affinity toward dead trees up in the local mountains, and we had this fire that swept through. I think it was back in 2003, something like that. And
California on fire?
Yeah, I know. Who would have thought? And this thing, it wiped out our backcountry, and many of the oaks that we have, they're very resilient. They came back. A lot of the pines were destroyed from that, and so it's had a long time for some of this stuff to come back, but there still are these skeletons of these oak trees that have fallen over a bit, and the ones that were just burned too much to recover. And so I'll probably head up there at some point and just spend some time getting to know the process and learning things. And
it could become a really interesting project for you too.
Yeah, I think it will, and I'm hoping that this Stearman Press will help with the inconsistent development that I had with trays, because it does hold the film a bit more in place than with trays, where it kind of moves around with the developer and stuff as everything's moving. And so I think this will be what I need to get into that, because I gotta say, I was looking through your portfolio the other day, just looking at all of the beautiful black and white images, and just thinking about how there's a different quality that it captures. And so I'm really looking forward to trying to find some of that in some of the local areas here, and just to have the experience of putting some compositions and some trees and stuff, because I love that process, getting under the dark cloth and everything else associated with that.
Yeah, it's nice, just even if you don't end up taking any photographs, just to just go through the motions, I've found is can be really just serene. But
Oh yeah.
have you found have you figured out what developer you're going to be trying?
So in the past, when I did a little bit of black and white, I used Ilford's developer, the Ilfasol 3. And I honestly don't have anything to compare my experience of that to. So I don't know, what to look for in terms of a developer and the differences. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Like I said, I've always used Ilford DDX. The primary reason for me even writing this article and getting these other developers to test out isn't because I'm unhappy with DDX. It's more so because I've heard such good things about PyroCat that I really want to try it, and it's a stain developer. So what that means is, well, it stains your negative. I mean, it gives it like a almost like a sepia tone, which doesn't affect your scanning process, but it has an effect when it comes to contact printing. So you'll end up, if you're printing with silver gelatin contact printing, the multi-grade papers, you'll end up with a little bit lower contrast, at least from what I've read. I haven't experimented with this, so I'm not exactly 100% in my knowledge here, but I also know that PyroCat is very popular among people who do platinum palladium printing, because it's supposed to help better retain your highlights, and at the same time boost your shadows a little bit. So it lowers the contrast overall of the film.
And that's for printing directly from the negative for doing the platinum prints?
Yeah, specifically, yeah.
Got it.
I mean, Matt Marash uses PyroCat, and I know Ryan Gillespie, when he was doing photography, I don't know if he still is, they both use that. So that's kind of where I heard the name from. But for someone who's just starting out, and I know you've had difficulty with black and white, I'll let you know how it goes this weekend, because I'm probably going to try to at least get the development of these 4 sheets done before I leave for this trip.
Nice.
I'm going to try this monobath, because what this is it's both developer and fixer in one standalone container. So I'm curious to see how that works, how that turns out. And I'm not 100%, but I think, too, it's just a what they call stand developing, where you pretty much just pour it in and you let it go for like an hour or so. And it just goes through the process. And you can do that with any film. I've done that, or with any developer, rather. I've done that with Ilford DDX already, where you pour it in, you agitate it for the first like minute or so, and then you just let it sit for an hour and 15 minutes or so. And it still develops. It just takes so much more time. But for maybe your first few sheets or so, that could be something that you might want to try.
Yeah.
Just to see, because then you have unless you measure something wrong, like you don't get the correct milliliters of formula in there, there's really no way that you can mess something up.
Well, that's certainly good. I will say, though, that, coming from the world of doing color, where things are kind of, it is what it is, you shoot transparency, you get it developed, you look at it, I'm like, well, that's a tree, that's a rock, cool, I'm going to scan it, going to make a print. Man, black and white is a whole nother world. So I think it'll be fun to learn the ropes a little bit, and then maybe it'll give me a different way of seeing things when I go on the trips, when I have a bit more of one bit more comfortable working with the film. There was something that I had on my mind a little bit in terms of some of the things to talk about here, and it's it has to do with the way that we learn. And because I've noticed some trends in the way that I learn, which I know is going to be a lot different from other people. I know that it has directly affected the way that I do the YouTube videos and everything else along those lines. But before we get to that, I want to ask you if there's a particular learning style that you find works well for you as opposed to other methods that are out there.
It depends on what I'm trying to learn, I think. So when it comes to photography, I'm all hands-on learning. I need to actually go through the process, and I can read about something and watch videos online and all of that, but if I don't put that knowledge to the test, then I lose it, or it just doesn't sink in. It doesn't stick.
Yeah.
When it comes to reading, and I guess I could say that's with everything, that I have to kind of apply it in some way, whether it's truly hands-on or it's through writing and using that knowledge in some way. Because with my readings too, I need to take notes, and then it helps to stick a little bit better, and then it sticks even more when I either try and explain it to someone else, or I try to write it down and implement it into an article or some other form of writing.
So it sounds like you're very, very much an independent learner.
Yeah.
And sort of seeking out the information. Have you ever done any photography classes or any sort of photography learning in more of a classroom sort of environment?
In high school, I took 2 photography classes, but that was only because I knew they were going to be an easy A. So
yeah, because it is really fascinating. Because you'll see that there'll be people that will go on workshops. There'll be people that really want to work with people directly to learn and to absorb their knowledge. But I'm also very much a independent learner. And I'll take on, if there's something that I want to know, I'll do whatever research it is to figure out what it is I want to seek out the information. But ultimately, for me personally, and this does relate a little bit to the discussion of black and white, but for me personally, the best way that I learn is, first of all, independently, but secondly, by making my own mistakes.
Yeah.
And I think that's something where in a traditional education environment where you're just following steps to do something, it didn't really hit home so much for me. But if I'm out there in the field and I do something wrong and I make a mistake, whatever it is, I'm going to learn so much more from that than from everything else. And I also have this thing where, and I think it's probably as a result of the way that I learn, is that I always feel really weird telling other people how they should do things. Which I think is one of the reasons why with like the YouTube stuff, I don't know, this might be something that you have noticed, but I never tell other people what to do. I never tell people how to do something, but partially because I don't know that the way that I'm doing it is necessarily the best way. And so I would think that teaching someone to do something the way I do it is perhaps going to do them a disservice. But rather it's just a way that I found that works for me.
Yeah, it could just be the wrong way for them to learn or to do it. I mean, there are certain things that I will do with my photography that if I try to teach it to somebody else, they'll not be able to understand it as well or grasp onto it as quick.
Yeah.
And I think that goes along in the lines of just the simple fact that everyone learns differently. Like, just because you understand something and a way to do something doesn't mean that anyone else is going to grasp onto that.
Yeah. And it also, it is kind of an interesting thing because it seems like with YouTube, with social media, with everything else, it seems like there comes a time for a lot of people where they become pretty decent at something, and the next course of action is to teach that. And it seems like all the YouTube videos, they're trying to teach things. And there is something very, there's definitely a place for that. During the pandemic, my wife remodeled one of our bathrooms based on only what she had learned from YouTube. So like how to tile, how to put new flooring in, how to do concrete countertops, all that sort of stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and YouTube was a very, very good resource for that because you could see these videos that were done by people that were doing that. But when it comes to art-related stuff, I struggle more with telling people what to do because it's not a trade. There's not a best practice of, this is how you need to prep the wall for doing the tiling. This is the exact materials you need. These are the steps that you follow. But I think when you view photography not as a technical thing, but more as something that exists in the art world, things get a bit fuzzy there. And it gets to be a little bit weird where I don't really have, I don't think that I'm even doing things the best way. It's just the way, the way that works for me. So I always feel weird telling people how to do things. But I think some of the best teachers are the ones that set the students up for failure. Did you ever have any teachers like that at all?
I wouldn't say it in the same way. I would say more so not necessarily setting up for failure, but allowing one to embrace the failures that are bound to come.
Yeah.
And showing that, yeah, if you make a mistake, if you screw something up, it's not that as big of a deal as you think. And I don't think I had any teachers that, at least not from my recollection, that did that. Or at least not as I saw it. But I know that I learned it from plenty of the books that I've read. And like, especially when it comes to books on stoicism and letting things go. And I try to convey that to other people too. That whole idea of, if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's something that you want to learn from and advance yourself. And to be honest, I think I learned that more from my parents than anyone else, the more that I think about it. Just that, like, my parents were never ones who were really hard on me for grades in school, or for, as long as I was doing the best that I could, then that's enough.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to get straight A's in class all the time, and I'm not going to be grounded for getting a C or anything like that. And even like the mistakes that I've made throughout my life, and just silly things that I know I shouldn't have done, but just in the moment they happened and whatever. The biggest thing, and my dad especially has always said, is just learn from them. Like, okay, you messed up, we get it, but take that knowledge now that you have of why this happened, how to prevent this from happening, and don't do it again.
That's definitely something that I can relate to. And I had a very similar experience growing up. And I think it's when people, whether it's, parents or teachers or whoever, they expect some degree of perfection. That just sets people up for the wrong kind of failure. Something where you're not really going to learn as much from that. And earlier when I was saying, a teacher that sets one up for failure, maybe that's a bit of a harsh way of saying it. But more so, and I can't really think of any specific examples because it's been so long since I've been in school. But basically where there's some sort of exercise that a teacher puts out there, and maybe there's just the right amount of vagueness about something that will cause you to sort of come up with your own solutions and make your own mistakes along the way, and then to learn along the way. But yeah, I mean, just looking back at everything, like I did take 1 year of photography in high school, and then I took a couple classes in college. But it was kind of along the lines of what your experience was in terms of, I knew it was a class I could probably get a pretty good grade on, but I didn't really take it seriously back then. I mean, not like I do now.
I think the other thing with that class, or the two that I took, I knew that it was going to be an easy class, and I went into it probably a little bit more confident than I would now. Like, I was less open to learning and soaking in any little bits of knowledge that I could. Because even when you go into a class or a workshop or any of that where you already know the content itself, there's still plenty that you can learn. I mean, even reading the bountiful number of articles online that say top 10 tips for like landscape photography and all of that. Yeah, they're cliches, and most of them are the same 10 tips just rehashed every month, but every once in a while there's still little things that you can point out. But more than that, I began getting inklings of wanting to teach, specifically photography, because there were people in that class. I mean, to be honest, the two teachers, both years, and it was just 1 year after the next, I think, that I took it, or even maybe just one semester after the next, I can't remember right, but there were two totally different teachers teaching it, because the school was just grabbing either long-term subs or people from the art department, like art teachers, in order to teach this class, just to fill it, just have a teacher for it. So these people didn't necessarily have as much experience as even I did, having at that time been doing photography for maybe 2 years or so. And so a lot of it was, I was actually helping the teacher and teaching the teacher new things about photography, as well as helping my classmates and giving better critiques and all of that in the classroom when we were showing our projects. So I think that was really where I got a lot of enjoyment out of it, because I was able to help other people and use my knowledge and expand upon my knowledge by teaching others. And I think that's why people do the whole YouTube thing too, because they learn photography, they learn this cool editing trick, or they learn how to process their film. And that's why you have so many film photographers who have only been shooting with film for maybe the past 6 months, but are now already posting out content on film. Because they learned, okay, this is how I develop black and white film. I want to make sure that I have this right, so I'm going to post a video about this, teach it how I know it, and then hopefully comments will come in and say, hey, here's 3 different ways to improve your process. Because that's the absolute best way to help to make sure that you know what you're talking about and help to expand your knowledge on a certain topic, is by teaching it. Because if you go in and you teach it and all of a sudden you realize they're not able to get it based on how I'm teaching it, well, then I don't understand it enough.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Because, I mean, the moment you try to teach something, that's when it definitely calls into question your complete understanding of everything, when you're trying to, simplify the process down in a way to articulate it to others. And I also wonder if, because you had mentioned your experience of, with the class, and then being there in person, and then seeing the development and then the results with the students, like in person. To me, that seems like that is a much more rewarding process than anything online, where you don't see, I mean, you'll see some degree of the results, but not in the same way as you do in person.
Plus, you have that immediate feedback.
Yeah.
You can see it when teachers say this all the time, and to the point of it almost being cliche, but I even saw it when I was doing some observations at schools and doing a little bit of teaching here and there, and you can tell when someone understands it because of the gleam in their eye. When all of a sudden they're working hard on this, even whether it's a math project or a photography, like making a photograph, editing it, when they get something and everything finally clicks into place, you can see it.
Yeah.
And that's not possible when you're online. Yeah, you can get affirmations from people afterwards saying, "Oh, thanks," like in form of comments, "Oh, thanks for posting this and it helps so much," but you don't quite get that same connection.
Yeah, it seems like you're more so getting like the little dopamine bumps as opposed to, having more so the connection with seeing the actual results. And anytime we see anything on a computer screen, it always feels, it's different than handling a print or seeing that print like mounted on the board and put up for critique. And so I would think that, I can definitely see how teaching in person is really going to be perhaps a lot more, a much more rewarding process. And also it would seem like the motivations are different too, because compared to the tutorials and such online, where in that case, you get to wonder how much of the motivation is coming from actually want to teach versus how much of it is really just to get the video out there for the ad revenue. And obviously, that's an important part of anyone's existence, trying to pay the bills. But there is definitely a bit of a difference there in terms of, between the two of those.
I think Sean Tucker's a pretty good example of that, and he's pretty outspoken about it too, from my understanding. Mm-hmm. That his YouTube video, the videos that he enjoys most are these interview projects that he's been working on, and the more sitting on the couch, waxing philosophical kind of videos, just talking straight to camera. Yet he's still posting tutorials, especially on, like, recently he's been doing ones on Photoshop and editing portraits and all of this kind of thing. And he's spoken out about it, that those videos, for the most part, are just to draw in some more traffic, with hopes that someone will go watch one of those videos, say, "Hey, this is pretty well done. What else does this guy have?" And then, "Oh, what's this video?" And then get drawn into the rest of the content.
Yeah.
Which I think is I don't think it's necessarily about the money in that aspect for him as much as it is for some other people. It's a more wholesome, I guess is at least one of the words to use for it, approach of doing things.
Yeah. It's a realistic approach in terms of that's the way that the platform works. Though also it seems like a lot of the people that are consuming the educational content, they're people that are rather new with photography. And one would hope that, the other work that you produce will hold their attention as they continue to grow, as opposed to, like in the case of my wife, remodeling the bathroom during the pandemic. She watched all those videos on tiling and concrete countertops. She learned what she had to learn, and then she was, she had no need for that content anymore,
Yeah.
So it's probably a matter of having some degree of balance there.
And like you were saying too, with Sean specifically, that's a matter of, you have a lot of beginners watching those tutorials and more perhaps advanced photographers who are watching his other videos because they're not necessarily looking for the how-to or the technicals, but they're looking for more of the inspirational kind of content.
Yeah.
And so you can grow as you grow, you can grow with his channel too.
Now, a little while back, you had mentioned critiques.
Yes.
And I have some experience with critiques in some of the classes I took in high school and in college. And then there's also the format that people are probably a little more familiar with now, it would be, online critiques and places like naturephotographers.net or naturephotographers.network, I think is what the new one is. I keep going by the old URL.
It's all right. It'll be in the show notes.
Yeah. So I have some thoughts on critique, but first I do want to hear what do you see as the difference between the in-person critiques and the online critiques, or do you see a difference there?
I can be more honest. I mean, I don't even know if I can say that. As a whole, though, I think people can be more honest in online critiques than they can in person.
Yeah.
Though this is definitely not always the case, because like I look at NPN and some of the critiques that people give and to certain photographs, and I don't necessarily see as much honesty on there as I should. And so as being a part of NPN, I have been trying to really boost the number of critiques that I give to people. And most of mine, much in the same vein as you, I'm sure, aren't saying what could be done or how I would do something better or how to fix something, but rather what's good about it and how you can advance it, not necessarily technically, but more on like an inspirational kind of level. I'm not sure exactly how to get that across, but nonetheless, I try to be as honest with them as I can. I mean, if something's not working for me, I'm just going to tell them something's not working. Like something's just, without being a complete jerk about it. I mean, but I think that's the biggest thing, especially when it's online, because we see that with texting all the time too. I mean, you can interpret a single text, you can interpret just the single word okay, like 7 million ways.
Yeah.
Depending on the context and the mood that you're in and all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's the biggest difficulty with online versus in person, because in person you can actually see, okay, this person, as harsh as he is being right now, he means well. Like he's not just doing this to knock me down a couple pegs to show that he's better than me.
Is there a format that you try to follow, or I should say, what's your approach when giving a critique? Like what's the process you go through?
Absent-mindedly, I guess I kind of go along with what I've always been taught when it comes to like peer reviews for English papers and that kind of thing, because that's what I know a lot better. I mean, I'm definitely not one for photography critiques. I can't stand doing them, to be quite honest. But I try to go and talk about what I like about the image as like a first thing, and then something that I'm not too much a fan of, and then either end it with something either in a way that could potentially help to fix it, or another point that I really like about it. So something like
the classic critique sandwich kind of a thing.
Yeah, something along the lines of, oh, I really like the diagonal lines that you implemented in this photograph. It helps to really bring your eye to the subject, and how you use the vignette to really narrow down really highlight that subject as well. And maybe some kind of actual critique would be like, what if you crop this into a square format because there's a lot of dead space on the right and left side of this or something, and then end it with, overall, I think that you just did really, really well with this image or something. I look forward to seeing what else you have.
Yeah.
Something really basic and just almost templated kind of format. But that's just because I don't have a lot of experience with actually critiquing people, and I also don't want to come across too strong. But I think that's also an issue that we have to get over if we want to really advance our career and advance our photography as an art form.
Yeah. I don't think I necessarily have a a specific technique. But usually the first thing I try to do is I try to pay attention to what my initial impression of the image is and try to figure out how that makes me feel. And then to try and then to articulate that in a way, because for me, that part is rather important. Because there's always that difficult to describe aspect of an image that makes you feel a certain way. And if one of my images is critiqued and the person mentions something along those lines, oh, it made me feel this way or that way, and if that aligns with more so what I had in mind as I was shooting it, it's nice to know that that particular aspect of the image comes through, setting aside any sort of like technical issues. So that's usually one of the first things I do. I just mention how the photo makes me feel. And because I figure that's probably, hopefully, comes of some value for the person who's receiving the critique.
Yeah.
And then I'll usually, there's no photo that's perfect. And if a photo is perfect, then there's something weird about that photo. There's always something minor, because usually the way that I feel based on looking at a photo, it's a direct result of the contents of that image, the subject choice, the lighting, something along those lines. And sometimes I'll identify something that seems to go a little bit against that feeling, whether it's maybe something is standing out too much or not enough, or there perhaps isn't quite as much emphasis on something in particular. And that's where, some subtle tweaks can help with that. Maybe alleviate some tension that conflicts with let's say that the photo has a rather calm feeling. And I can tell that is likely what the photographer was intending for, but perhaps there's something very subtle that is conflicting with that. And if there's a way of alleviating that or leaving that tension, then it can further reinforce that initial feeling of the photo. Because this is more so the process I go through with my own images, where I look at it, I'm like, there's something just not quite right about this. And it's usually something rather small. What's your thoughts on when it comes to suggesting crops of an image?
I mean, I know with my work, I always try to stay within confines of an aspect ratio, like a set ratio. So like 4:5, 8:10, 4:6, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
My big thing is I will explain to them how to crop it, but I won't show them. I know a lot of people with like NPN specifically, you can go on and people will let you download their image at like a lower resolution to help to show them what kind of changes you might make. And to me, that makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm not sure exactly why. Like I'll go ahead and I'll do it, but it gives me that same feeling of like when you go onto Facebook and say you post a photograph that you really like and you talk a little bit about it, and then a couple comments down you have someone posting another image of theirs.
Yeah.
And it gives that same feel of like, okay, now I'm trying to steal the attention from the original post. So like I said, I will just tell people roughly how to crop it and let them take their own interpretation of it, rather than, again, like you were saying earlier, telling them exactly how to do it or showing them exactly how to do it. I think it's a better way.
And that sounds like a very good approach to me. I think one of my gripes when it comes to critiques, and this is probably more so for online critiques because it's just a byproduct of the way that it works, is when a person posts a photo and you can tell that they had, what their sense of vision was for that scene. And then during the critique, someone will do like a massive crop of that photo. And I mean, crop in, let's say that it was starting out at like, let's say a 20 megapixel camera. They crop down to like 5 megapixels.
Yeah.
They do this massive crop, which completely changes it. Because at that point, you are completely eliminating the original vision of the photographer, and you're making it into something of your own from what's already there, as opposed to working with the vision that the photographer had for that scene to begin with. And so I'll say it's a little bit of a gripe of mine, suggesting really big crops. I can understand a very subtle crop if there's some sort of conflicting element causing some tension within the scene, and maybe just eliminating just some minor thing off to the side. That I'm fine with. And I really like your strategy there in terms of saying, hey, you may want to, consider cropping that.
One that I did recently that involved cropping, someone had photographed, it was a pretty cool image of, you had like a nice deep blue wave in the very front, and you had sails that were the main focus. And then it was almost like a panoramic aspect ratio, but off to the right, you could see a bunch of, I guess it was like a small town on a distant mountain, and it was just something that like kept drawing my eye in. It was one of those things that it was pretty distracting to me, but there was no way for you to eliminate that, at least that I saw, without doing a ton of like cloning out, and then I think it just looked weird.
Yeah.
Or cropping. So that was and that took off a decent like quarter of the image. That was like the only time that I really suggested cropping in to a more harsh degree.
Yeah.
Because normally other times when I suggest cropping, it's because, yeah, like I was saying, you have a little bit too much dead space on one side or the other. It'll help to balance the image out more without changing your intention of it.
Now, what about a situation where there's something that you notice with an image that there is nothing that can be done about? Let's say, for example, they're photographing a scene that has a dominant foreground, kind of mid-ground background, and you know that if they had moved the camera 3 inches to the right, things would line up better. But now the photo's done, there's nothing that can be done about it. What kind of what are your thoughts in terms of raising issues along those lines as perhaps something that they can learn from next time, but will do nothing to benefit a photo that's already been taken?
It's the same thing as learning from your mistakes, isn't it?
It is, but in the context of a critique, it feels a little different to me.
See, I don't see it that way. I see it as, yeah, the photograph might be okay, but when I'm critiquing, and I kind of want people to, and I know it's never going to work out like this, or at least rarely will, but I want them to want the same from their photographs as I want from mine.
Yeah.
In the degree that I want the absolute best from mine, and if something just doesn't work right, even if it is a once-in-a-lifetime shot, I want someone to point that out to me and say, here's what you do, or here's what may have made this photograph even better, just one step up.
Yeah.
And so for me to critique someone about that, I have no issues telling them, like, hey, if you get the chance to, or if you come into a similar scenario here, maybe try another shot with 3 inches to the right, physically moving 3 inches to the right. Don't crop into it now. Don't try and fix it now. It's done. There's no fixing it in terms of making it that shot that it could have been. But take that knowledge the next time that you go out and apply that knowledge. And let's be honest. Most time photographers have like 700 shots of one subject because it's free and it's digital. I mean, it's one thing for you and I where, especially with me, I take one photograph. Yeah.
Yeah.
I take one photograph of a scene or a composition. All right, I'm done. Walking away. On to the next one.
Yeah.
And yeah, so for digital photographers especially, it's play around. I mean, that's the best thing that you can do, especially when you're first learning or you're not sure of something. Walk the scene. And even, as much as I hate to say it, and it's not my style, and I know it's not yours, but digital's the number of files that you can take, that's free. I mean, past physical storage and all of that, there's no cost to it, really. So
Yeah.
use it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And I will say that the bit about, if only the camera had been 3 inches to the right, that is something that I often do mention in critiques. And I'll usually try to phrase it in a very nice way in terms of being very nice about it, saying like, I know that there's nothing that can be done about it now, this and that, and finding ways of using nice words. But basically so that one can learn from a particular photo, because that way it will be something that does go through their mind, perhaps next time they're setting up a photo. And just as you had mentioned, learning from one's mistakes, and it's hard to learn from them if you don't recognize them, and that is an area where a critique really does help out quite a bit with that. But yeah, it is I will say it's a bit of a challenge with the critiques, and also the other thing you had mentioned about how with online critiques, and about how people oftentimes can be more honest, but then there's also, when you have a community that forms around the critiques and there's a lot of familiar faces, then I think that honesty goes away. And so a long time ago, when I was first getting into photography, there was a photography review site. I can't even remember what it was. This had to have been early 2000s. And you can post your work on there for critique. And they were okay critiques. They weren't amazing, but they're okay. But you could also post it completely anonymously. And I gotta say, I really enjoyed that, because then you're getting more of a true sense of what people think about it, because they don't know who it is that's posting the image. I mean, sometimes they can tell, but that was an element that I really did like about that particular critique site.
And we've talked about this before. You definitely have a point there, where you get into this community and all of a sudden they'll talk about an image without saying it to you directly. They'd be more inclined to like gossip about you or a photograph behind closed doors, just like in a small town community, where you get to know everybody, and you don't want to irritate anyone else or offend anyone else, but you still want to speak your mind, so you do it in little clicks. And whether that's happening in a community like NPN, I at least don't want to think so. But at the same time, I do agree that there's a lack
it's
of
human nature.
Yeah, there's a lack of honesty when it comes to some of the critiques. And like I said before, there's some that I go on and they have critiques, and people are just trying to be nice and saying things and just beating around the bush, when yeah, it's gonna hurt, but just tell them it's not a good image.
Yeah.
Just tell them it doesn't work. But don't just tell them it doesn't work. Tell them it doesn't work and give them ideas for making it better. Because that's what a critique is. At least in my mind, there shouldn't be any kind of, oh yeah, good job, here's an award for taking this photograph. I mean, come on, we're not kids. Like, you want to have your work critiqued, put it out there with the knowledge that you are going to be critiqued truly and honestly. And if you don't want your work critiqued, great. NPN has their showcase. Instagram has free platforms. Yeah. You throw it up on Instagram, delete make sure that there are no comments. You can disable your comments, disable your likes, all of that. Just throw it up there. I mean, there are ways to get around it, where if you don't want to be critiqued, then don't. That's fine.
Yeah.
But if you really want to learn and you really want to improve your photography in a much quicker succession, throw your work out there and get it critiqued, and ask for the most truthful, brutally honest feedback that you can possibly get, because that's going to make the difference.
I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us by email at cody@codyschultz.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.